If you wanted to learn a new language, or how to draw, or perhaps even an entire university degree on your own, how would you go about doing it? For about a decade, I've been following the blog of a writer called Scott Young, who talks a lot about these topics. Scott is probably most famous for his project to learn the entire 4-year MIT computer science course by himself in under a year, but he's also done projects where he's taught himself to draw in a month and spent a year without speaking English to force himself to learn 4 new languages. In a sense, what drives Scott to undertake these learning projects seems to be a passion for understanding the principles of how we learn as much as the actual learning itself. For years, he's written about these principles on his blog, but recently he finally combined them all into a single book, which, if you haven't guessed it already, is going to be the subject of this video. The book is titled Ultralearning, Accelerate Your Career, Master Hard Skills and Outsmart the Competition, and I've just finished reading it, so wanted to give you guys a rundown. Scott defines ultralearning as a strategy for acquiring skills and knowledge that is both self-directed and intense. Now, frequently, self-improvement books tend to push a single thesis stretched out to fill a publisher's demand of 300 pages, but this is not the case with ultralearning, so it's a little difficult to know how to summarize it. What ultralearning does is provide nuanced advice through 9 principles. Those are metalearning, focus, directness, drill, retrieval, feedback, retention, intuition, and experimentation. Metalearning. Metalearning focuses on mapping out your learning journey before you begin, the why, what, and how of your project, recognizing bottlenecks and identifying which study methods you'll need to focus on. This research and assessment phase should occur at the beginning, but be repeated as often as is necessary throughout the project. Across the whole project, it should account for about 5 to 10% of your total time. Focus. Here, methods for overcoming procrastination and avoiding distraction are given, as well as some interesting points on the topic of mental arousal, that is, how wired and alert you are feeling. There are certain times when it helps to be highly alert, and others where it's actually more beneficial to be less so. Directness. This could be boiled down to doing what is important, not what is comfortable. The directness principle says you should tailor your learning project to match the context in which you plan to use the skill. You do this by assessing what is most necessary to learn and learning it, by heading directly towards what your goal is, not skirting around the edges by doing what is comfortable. So, if you want to speak Spanish, then your assessment for success is whether you can speak to someone in Spanish, not how many Duolingo lingots you have or which level you've reached. That being the case, the direct thing to do is to go out and start speaking to people in Spanish, either face-to-face or via Skype. Frequently, we try to improve in a general fashion, leveling up in all areas, when in truth it's a few specific ones which are holding us back. We do this because it just takes so much less effort in the short term. However, we don't consider the time it wastes in the long run. Ultralearning, by contrast, is very much about putting conscious thought into what you focus on, so as to get where you're going in the most efficient manner and actually achieve what you set out to achieve. Drill. This is about breaking big topics down into constituent parts, then identifying which part you're worst at and studying it intensely in order to drastically improve your overall performance. You could think of it as identifying and removing bottlenecks in performance. It follows on from directness. Assume you've tried speaking to someone in Spanish but really struggled. Now it's time to work out why you struggled. What is your bottleneck? A bottleneck is both what you're not good at and also what's key to progression. Maybe your grammar is good, but your pronunciation and vocabulary are both bad. Well, you could improve both, but you notice even though your pronunciation is bad, people can understand you. That means it's not really an immediate bottleneck. So you identify your bottleneck to be your vocabulary, at which you are both bad and, at your current level, unable to work around. Since you know your aim is to speak, and your vocabulary is the single biggest thing stopping you speaking, it's time to drill vocabulary. An hour spent doing so will be multiple times more valuable than an hour spent elsewhere. The chapter on drill goes into detail on different methods for breaking apart a topic and for drilling each part, as well as when and when not to use them. As an example, flashcards might be your go-to method for drilling things. However, while they might be good for learning syntax, they tend not to be good for learning concepts. Retrieval. The way our education system tends to work is that first you learn the material and then you take a test to get a grade. But in reality, the testing phase itself is what provides most of the learning. The principle here is to keep testing your ability to make your brain properly process the information. I remember telling myself in high school that I didn't need to do the problem questions at the end of a maths chapter because I had already read the chapter and thoroughly understood it. Of course, in reality, I had only a superficial grasp, and when someone challenged me on it, I couldn't answer the questions. In the words of Richard Feynman, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. The chapter on retrieval goes on to give a variety of methods for testing beyond just sitting an exam, such as writing out everything you can remember from a chapter, using flashcards, rephrasing what you've just read, or creating challenge questions for yourself while you read a chapter. Feedback. The most important principle here is that whenever you test yourself, you should receive feedback on your answers as soon as possible, with the caveat that you have to actually thoroughly attempt to answer the question first, not simply check the book immediately. The chapter also details different types of feedback and criticism you might get and how to process them, as well as whether positive feedback is good or bad. Retention. This chapter dives into the different ways and reasons we forget, and provides tips on how you can hold on to what you've spent so much time learning. Intuition. This chapter deals with intuition and pattern recognition as modes of solving problems versus general memory. It deals with true understanding of a topic versus a superficial ability to recall facts, and it deals with being true to yourself about what you truly know and understand about something. It's one of the more abstract chapters which is difficult to quickly convey, but a summary of the chapter would be: don't give up on hard problems easily, prove things in order to understand them properly, use concrete examples over abstract ones, and don't fool yourself into thinking you understand what you don't truly understand. One of my childhood heroes, Richard Feynman, also features quite prominently in it, as well as a method Scott has long recommended, which he calls the Feynman technique for studying. In short, this method is: write down a concept or problem, write out an explanation of it as if explaining it to someone else. When you get stuck, go back to the book. That seems incredibly simple, but the act of explaining something has the effect of creating a deeper, intuitive understanding of a topic to develop, more so than just listing some facts or applying a formula does in a test. In fact, I remember discovering the effectiveness of this technique at age 17, when I had fallen so far behind in my statistics class that I could barely answer a single question in tests. None of it made sense to me, so I read and summarized the textbook as if I were explaining it to myself as a second person. In a week, I went from bottom to top of the class, because I developed a proper understanding of what we were doing and became able to prove the derivations of the techniques and not just plug in the numbers. Experimentation. As your skill at a topic develops, the number of educational resources available to you tends to diminish as you move beyond all the beginner material. This being the case, you need to get more creative in what you do. Furthermore, at the peak of performance, experts tend to develop their own unique styles, and there becomes no one style that is regarded as the best. Essentially, you have to start experimenting to find your own path, as if you want to be successful, you cannot just replicate what other people have done. The chapter also tells the story of Vincent van Gogh, who only began to learn how to paint at age 26 after a failed career as an art dealer. He was, to all accounts, not especially naturally talented, and was starting to learn at a very late age. Even worse, he antagonized and fell out with practically everyone he worked with, so ended up having to essentially teach himself. However, by his death at age 37, just 11 years later, he had created a number of what are now considered the greatest paintings in the world. This came about, firstly by his prodigious work ethic, but secondly by the fact that he experimented with hundreds of different styles, many of which were complete disasters, until he eventually found his own and went on to create a unique brand of art. Ultimately, this book is not a single thesis, or if it has a thesis, it's that ultralearning is a good thing. Really, the book is a series of steps and explanations, and is filled with far more nuance than I can do justice to in a short review. As such, I do recommend you read it for yourselves. It's being released on hardback and audio form on August the 6th, but if you pre-order before it comes out and email Scott a copy of your receipt, he'll send you a bunch of extra content in the form of ebooks and videos. You can find a link to that promotion in the description. By the way, while this is a ringing endorsement of the book, it's not in any way sponsored by it. The only revenue I receive is via the regular Amazon affiliate links. Finally, let me know in the comment section if you're working on any ultralearning projects right now, and how you are coping, as well as whether you are a reader of Scott's blog or have come across him before. And if you like this style of content, then let me know that too.